Angeles, in our country, the one they say was never great. The screaming, stealing, flag-burning mob was there to express their love and support for Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Waters had inspired them with rhetoric like this.
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere.
Meanwhile, elsewhere in Los Angeles, a newly opened coffee shop was attacked by masked protesters who hurled feces at the building. They said the owner of the building supports Donald Trump's immigration policies. Well, as it happens, the owner is himself an immigrant. I'm confused, he said, but it didn't matter. On the left, the penalty for thought crime is swift and certain, if nonsensical. For disagreeing with the mob on immigration, the immigrant owner is not allowed to make a living. Those are the rules. Well, this lunacy did not come out of the blue. It has been brewing for quite some time.
We will make your system fall. We will make your system fall. If kids don't eat in peace, you don't eat in peace. If kids don't eat in peace, you don't eat in peace. Sam Bondi, shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you.
Well, we first saw this brand of extremism on college campuses where student activists demonstrated against new ideas they didn't understand or against any kind of dissent from the narrow orthodoxy of the campus left. Over time, though, their protests became physical and then dangerous. Windows smashed, fires set, people beaten and threatened with death. In the past few months, scenes like that have moved off campus into our world. The left began threatening Trump administration officials who dared to appear in public, kicking them out of restaurants and screaming at them on the street. Now they're targeting private citizens who might be sympathetic to the administration. Want to open a small business? Well, you can't do that unless you voice this week's progressive dogmas. That's a lesson corporate America learned years ago and has applied ever since. It is, of course, the very opposite of freedom. The fall elections are less than 4 months from today. Tempers will rise even higher than they are now. That is guaranteed. Something awful could easily happen. Now, right now, is the time for progressive leaders to douse the fires that they set to calm their inflamed supporters. It is vital they do that. And yet they're doing the opposite. Now they're telling their followers that the President of the United States is a traitor. The penalty for treason is death. Traitors, of course, must be overthrown. The mob screams, wild with rage. Democrats are banking that that rage will get their voters to the polls in November. And they may be right. It may. It may also destroy the country. Robert Patillo is a radio host and an attorney, and he joins us tonight. Robert, thank you for coming on. I have a question that I wanted to ask for a long time, someone on the left. Why the flag burning and the attacks on America? Why is this? These protests very often devolve into an attack on the country itself. Its symbols, this chant, America was never great, your founding fathers owned slaves. Why attack the whole country?
Well, I think you can find extremists on both the left and the right who do things that are anti-American. The same way you have these protesters, you'll have the Charlottesville protesters on the other hand who are anti-American. I don't support any of these people who, if you don't like America, get out of America. If you're a neo-Nazi, get out of America.
Well, I agree with that.
Minutes.
Look, I have no problem with that. But hold on. Okay, and I think it's a fair point. But the scale is very different. So you have the Charlottesville riot or whatever it was last August, a year ago. You haven't seen anything like that since. The NFL has been in a continuous controversy over kneeling during the national anthem, an attack on a national symbol. Left-wing protests routinely contain attacks on the country. The T-shirt, "Your country was never great," is for sale online. So is the hat. What is that about? I'm not saying there are no conservatives, right-wingers who don't hate America, but there are a lot on the left who do, and they're very open about it. Why? And why don't leaders ever say anything about it?
Well, I think leaders do, and I think it's very easy to find the clips of the most crazy, most extreme elements of the political discourse and make that seem like that is the norm. That is not the norm. Most people who are protesting are saying we want reasonable policies that all Americans can unite around. And frankly, I think a large part of this falls on the president. You know, President Truman had a placard on his desk saying the buck stops here. That is what President Trump has to take up and understand, that he has to bring these parties together. If people are protesting over the immigration policy, then do like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan would do, and you bring together the stakeholders, you hammer out an immigration reform bill, you bring it before the American people, you discuss it, and that will tamp down these protests. But leaving this vacuum of information where people think that children are being kidnapped, that's not going to work.
Okay, so I agree with a lot of what you're saying, actually. I do want a rational conversation about what's best for the country. Try to do that every night on this show. It's pretty hard to do that, though, when people are saying not just House and Senate are calling the President of the United States a traitor, someone who's committed treason, a death penalty offense. If you really believe the president was a Russian agent, as elected members of Congress have said today, then how could you do anything but try to overthrow him? That's not a predicate for reasonable discussion, is it?
Well, absolutely not. But what I think has to happen is the president hasn't explained what the point of the meeting with Putin was, what happened in that meeting with him for those 2 hours, why there was no other members of the intelligence community or national security staff there with them, why he offered to have Russians interrogate American citizens. So when you have this information vacuum, this falls in a large part on the president's communications team.
Wait a second. Then why are they? Hold on. I mean, I could rebut a lot of what you just said. The president can't hand anybody over to the Russians, despite what Democrats keep saying. That doesn't work that way. You're not allowed. What is he going to, inject them with barbiturates and throw them on a plane to Moscow? I mean, it's ludicrous. But it's not my job to defend Trump. I'm just asking, if you don't know what happened, why are you jumping to the conclusion that he committed treason? That's what elected members of Congress are saying. They're using the word treason. If you really believed he was committing treason, why wouldn't you try to overthrow him or hurt him? Seriously.
But remember, this goes back to the concept of the buck stopping with the president. He has to use his bully pulpit not to bully people, but to articulate a message to America.
What do you mean? But what do you say if somebody says, "Wait"? If I said, "I don't agree with you. You've committed treason. You're a traitor. You're a sleeper cell for one of our enemies." What do you say to that? I mean, honestly, that's not the beginning of a conversation. That's a call for violence.
Look, Tucker, I practice criminal defense every day. And what ends up happening is people accuse your client of everything under the sun in the indictment. But what you do is argue back your point. You say that, well, the reason I was meeting with Putin was because we have interests in Syria that need to be articulated between the two parties. Because we have to work on oil and gas pipelines. He's not getting his messaging out. And when you leave this vacuum out there, that's when you have members of the Republican Party.
Are you being serious? I mean, are you being serious? Look, again, whatever. I don't care about the Republicans. Everyone always says, oh, the Republicans say it too. I couldn't be less impressed with them as a group. So that means nothing to me. But will you at least concede that calling someone a traitor is a conversation ender, not a starter? And maybe you should wait for evidence that a person has betrayed his country before calling him a traitor. Is that fair?
Well, that's fair, but let's not pretend that the last 8 years, the last 16 years didn't happen. When you had people claiming that Obama was a Kenyan who was part of a sleeper cell sent here and part of a madrasa, let's understand this discourse didn't start with Trump. We have to do something to tamp it down. Joe Walsh yelled out, "You lie," during your presidential address.
That. Okay, well, he did lie, actually, but lying is very different from being part of a sleeper cell.
And while being a private citizen, President Trump pushed the birtherism idea for years. Let's understand that the buck stops with the president in order to tamp these things down. Have a conversation with the American people. Say exactly what you're. The buck stops with you. You are the leader of the free world.
I don't understand your point, but I appreciate part of what you're trying to say, but I don't understand the rest. Robert, it's nice to see you tonight. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker.
A professor at Yale University, which is like an Ivy League school that people once upon a time considered impressive, but smart people no longer do, is now calling on fellow progressives to actively defy federal law by hiding illegal immigrants. His name is Greg Gonsalves. He's supposedly a law professor, and yet he tweeted this recently, quote, "We hide immigrants from ICE if we have to." The professor says this would be, quote, civil disobedience rather than aiding and abetting criminal activity. Lawrence Jones is editor-in-chief of Campus Reform. He's been following this and joins us tonight. This leads to the larger question, Tucker, Lawrence, of why we even bother to fund universities. They're a joke, but we're getting to that later in the show. To the specifics of this case, how did he express this? What was the response?
Well, I asked a simple question. I am an editor-in-chief. I'm a journalist. This is something that the left said is being attacked. So I asked the question, are you guys aiding and abetting? Simple question. He, in return, blocked me and decided to go after my organization and say that we should be on the list for the Southern Poverty Law Center. That simple.
The Southern Poverty Law. That's the fake civil rights group that gets people banned, that crushes the free speech rights of people it disagrees with. Right, yeah, I'm familiar with them. So he didn't respond at all. Do you find, in a meaningful way, do you find it ironic that a law professor would be calling on his students to ignore the law?
Well, we couldn't find his actual law degree, so, I mean, I don't even understand how he's teaching students about the law. You know, it's crazy, Tucker.
Wait,
because
I'm sorry. What do you mean? What do you? I'm sorry. I'm interrupting you. What do you mean by that? You couldn't find his law degree?
Well, we couldn't find his law degree. We couldn't find a JD behind his name, but he's teaching at the school, so you know, he must have a PhD, but it's not specifically. He's not a lawyer. He's not a practicing lawyer. We couldn't find it, so unless he has records that are being hidden, we would love to see that. But Tucker, my point is, there's a lot of laws that I don't like. I'm a civil libertarian, and I want to push the war on drugs that went after my community. I didn't like those communities, but I don't get to say DEA. I get to harbor and abet criminals. That just doesn't work that way. And so instead of him answering my question, he went after the president of our company because he's an old white man, and he didn't want to face the black man, the black reporter that asked him the question, are you aiding and abetting? Just a simple question. But let's attack the old white guy.
That's kryptonite for a guilty white liberal. That's hilarious.
Right.
Lawrence, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Dan Bongino is a former Secret Service agent, NYPD officer, now an NRA TV contributor, frequent guest on this show because he's smart and concise and thinks stuff through. So, Dan, we've done a bunch of shows on this topic, but we're going to continue to because I think I'm not imagining the acceleration of the rhetoric. And when rhetoric reaches a certain point, it becomes violence. Where are we on that continuum, do you think?
Yeah, I'm worried. We're past the event horizon right now in the black hole, Tucker. And the reason I'm worried is I think what's going on here, and I'm not trying to be an amateur sociologist here, but in the past we've had kind of this iron triangle of activist groups, liberal politicians, and the media. And their tactic, Tucker, has been very strictly enforced gaslighting. Repeat a narrative, however false it is. Republicans are racist, misogynist. We've heard them all in the past. Repeat it confidently and isolate people from the truth by collectively reporting the narrative together. I think what's happening right now is Trump just absolutely refuses to back down to this. He'll use his Twitter account, he'll use the bully pulpit of the White House, and he will not play the typical rhino game of the past where the minute the R word or the M word or the xenophobic word comes out, he backs down. Therefore, to wrap this up, average levels of aggression aren't working, Tucker. So instead of dialing it back and re-strategizing, they're going to like hyper-aggression at this point, and that's where we are now, which really worries me.
But it's the supposedly responsible people who are doing it. Twice or three times this week I've thought, now, if this were Obama who went to Helsinki and met with Putin, and I'd never liked Obama, I thought he was bad for America, and all of a sudden Republican leaders were calling him a traitor, would I sit back and say, yeah, he's a traitor, or would I say, what do you mean by that? I mean, we're the responsible people on the left. It's okay to hate, to not like Trump. I get it. But why are they sitting back and allowing the leaders of their party to say things that are totally reckless and insane, which they are?
Because, Tucker, they've ginned up the base to such a point. You saw it in the opening segment with your debate with the liberal radio host. They've ginned up the base into believing that this man is actually these things. These are false. They're utterly absurd. The fact that we're repeating them, we've lost 10 IQ points talking about it. But they've ginned up their base into believing that this man is, the Trump, by the way, is a fascist. What else is the appropriate response? It's nothing but critical theory, you know, that acknowledges a construct of power kind of thing. And this, we have to shut him down. It's not even worthy of debate. And the hyper-aggressive response is the only response if you believe Trump is a fascist, which is absolutely absurd and ridiculous.
This Russia story is making us all very dumb. I'm not going to be able to balance my checkbook by next week. Dan Bongino, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Yes, sir. You too.
Well, last night we broke the story that two sources say that Tony Podesta has been offered immunity from criminal prosecution in return for testimony against Paul Manafort. We have new developments in that story tonight, and that's after the break. That we spoke to directly told us that the lobbyist Tony Podesta, of course a huge fundraiser for Bill and Hillary Clinton, the brother of Hillary's campaign chairman, had been offered criminal immunity by Robert Mueller in return for testifying against Paul Manafort, with whom he worked to lobby on behalf of Ukraine once upon a time. Well, we asked the obvious question when we heard this: what distinguishes Tony Podesta from Paul Manafort, who, by the way, is behind bars facing life, now in solitary confinement? Well, maybe the answer is only one of them supported Donald Trump. We're happy to root out all the unregistered foreign agents in this country, but the law should apply to everybody, not just people who support a president Washington despises. Joe DeGenova has been in Washington a long time. He's a former U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia, and he joins us tonight. So, Joe, as we said last night, I want to restate now, we spoke to two separate sources who told us, who were close to this question, that Tony Podesta, former head of the Podesta Group, the biggest Democratic lobbying firm in Washington, had been offered immunity by the Mueller investigation in exchange for testifying against Paul Manafort. If that is true, what does it mean?
It means that the Mueller investigation has now reached a level of debasement akin to the 9th level of hell in Dante's Inferno. It also means that if you're a Democrat, you get a pass. There are two standards of justice in this town being carried out by the Department of Justice under both administrations and the FBI under both administrations. The FBI and the DOJ under Obama gave Hillary Clinton a pass. They ignored criminal violations and found her innocent when, in fact, she had violated the law. They immunized her lawyers. They immunized her staff. They immunized the people who bleached her computer. All of them were Democrats. And now in the prosecution of Paul Manafort, who do they immunize first? The person who broke the law, just like allegedly Paul Manafort did, helped the Russians, helped some phony Ukrainians. And what does Bob Mueller do first? He immunizes a guilty Democrat.
So give us some perspective on the FARA law, Foreign Agent Registration Act of 1938. It's been around a long time.
Yes.
50 years between 1966 and 2016, 7 people were prosecuted under it. 7
Yes.
in 50 years. In the past year, we've had 3 people prosecuted under it, all of them connected to Donald Trump. Does this seem like selective enforcement of the law to you?
Well, there's no doubt that it does. And even though it technically is within the power of a prosecutor to make these types of decisions, what you are seeing rolled out now by Robert Mueller, the esteemed Mr. Mueller, is the degradation of the federal criminal law enforcement process. And you can thank Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, who set up this phony investigation, and Christopher Wray, the current FBI director, who has never once put on his big boy pants and is allowing this to happen. This is an embarrassment to federal law enforcement. Every FBI agent, every DOJ lawyer who's worth his or her salt knows that what you are watching is a debasement of federal law enforcement. It ought to be an embarrassment to somebody like Mueller, but the truth is Mueller has stayed too long at the fair.
Joe DeGenova, former federal prosecutor, thank you very much. Michael Caputo was an advisor to the Trump campaign. He has been around the block in this Russian nonsense, and he joins us tonight. Michael, what is your response to the news, again, from two sources telling us Tony Podesta has been offered immunity in order to testify against Paul Manafort? What would that mean from your point of view, if true?
Well, it's completely disgusting, Tucker. I can't think of another word for it. This is very clearly partisan. Tony Podesta didn't just represent the Ukrainians and didn't register for them. He actually registered for Uranium One and Rosatom. He represented Sberbank, which is, that's like representing directly Vladimir Putin. Sberbank is Vladimir Putin's hip pocket bank. From my perspective, they're probably giving him immunity, not just because he can do something to hurt Paul Manafort, because they certainly don't want him talking about Uranium One and Sberbank. If there was somebody in Washington representing the Russians in 2016, It was Tony Podesta. And by the way, Tucker, there are 17 Democrats who registered for Russian companies that were connected to the Kremlin or actually registered to represent the Kremlin. And those are just the ones who were registered. As you know, Washington is lousy with people doing the bidding of foreign countries without registering.
Yeah, I mean, they're literally everywhere. They're on my street. They're on everybody's street in the entire city, which is why to see the FARA law applied in the way it has been in the last year is just bewildering. And by the way, I'm not against it. I don't think people should lobby for foreign governments without registering. But to see it applied only to one side is genuinely shocking.
I think you hit it on the head.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. FARA only matters if you know Donald Trump. I mean, certainly lobbying for foreign countries is completely legal in the United States. But if you do it and you work for Donald Trump or you knew Donald Trump, you're headed for problems.
As far as I can tell, the biggest and most effective foreign lobbyists in Washington are not registered under FARA. So maybe that will change. Hope so. Michael, great to see you.
Great to see you, Tucker. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks. Well, in cities across America, the more liberal, the more likely this is to be, illegal immigrants are getting voting rights. Why is that not a threat to American democracy? If Russians influencing our elections is bad, why is foreigners from Latin America influencing our elections not bad? We'll ask that question. As recently as a few years ago, there were progressives who at least paid lip service to the idea of securing the border. Now that idea is dead. Its grave has been bulldozed again and again. On the left, the new policy is to abolish ICE border enforcement, make every city a sanctuary city, then give illegal immigrants welfare benefits and the right to vote. But don't worry, they're telling us, importing millions of new non-citizen voters isn't interfering in our elections. That's only what incompetent Russians do on Facebook. It's something better than that. It's the next frontier in civil rights. Ethan Behrman is a California radio show host, and he joins us tonight. So, Ethan, this is a question I've been asking to a number of my progressive friends in the last 48 hours. Why is it wrong for non-citizens from Russia to play a role in our electoral process, but okay for non-citizens from other countries to play a role in our electoral process? Both seem wrong to me.
Totally separate issues. The Russians are actually attacking us, undermining not only the election systems themselves, but the integrity of our federal elections. What we're talking about in cities like San Francisco is allowing immigrants who are here, who have children enrolled in schools, who are paying taxes, to vote for the local school board where we need them to be participating and being active
wait a second. I mean, hold on. No, you don't know that. I mean, the Russians who hacked our election,
yes,
living here, some of them. I mean, you could have Russian agents living in the United States, and they have a vested interest in the government of the United States, and they're trying to affect the outcome of an election that determines who leads the United States. So by the standards that you just set out, that's cool. But somehow it's not cool because they're Russian or they don't vote Democrat? I mean, what is the difference? Honestly, I'm confused.
Yeah, the difference is pretty clear and significant. GRU intelligence officers operating out of a data center in Moscow, for example, or an office in Moscow, who are actively attacking the databases of our local and state elections, who are actually attempting to interfere with, for example, our command and control systems for our critical infrastructure, a la black energy malware. That is ultimately and fundamentally different than somebody who came here for a job that was brought here by an employer who have kids in school as required by law. Their kids have to be in school.
They're cool people. First of all, they weren't brought here by employers. That's not true, as you know. But wait, hold on.
Sure.
I'm still confused. So the government of Mexico encourages people to come to the United States illegally and vote. They do. They say it out loud. That's okay with you because why? It's a foreign government that has different interests from those of the United States. It's hostile to the U.S. often, and they're seeking to influence our elections. But you're okay with that because why?
No, because on federal elections, that's against federal law to vote if you're not a citizen.
No, but
so what's happening
I've
in
never
cities
heard
like
a single
Boston
liberal complain about it.
Oh, well, I only want citizens to vote in federal elections per federal law. So in local issues, we have horrible participation by Americans, and this is evidence in the Portland State University study. So for like city councils and mayors, horrible turnout, and it's basically old, wealthy white people who show up to vote. So that's plantation-style politics that we're trying to encourage.
Oh, it's white
instead
people.
of saying, let's get more people.
So it really wouldn't be a conversation with a liberal unless they had some casual racism in there. It's attacking a group
that is a
people
fact.
on the basis of their skin color.
The data show
totally
that.
cool. We had a whole
not,
civil rights movement against it, but we're for it now. Right, I get that. Okay. No, I totally
but that's what the data show, Tucker.
But let me just, the data show that the left is casually racist in almost every conversation you have with them, and no one seems to notice except me. It's so weird. But whatever. Let's just very quickly get back to the topic, which is the line between legitimate voting and illegitimate voting. A lot of us believed that citizenship conferred the right to choose your government. That's what democracy is. The left is now saying that's not true. People who are foreign national citizens of other countries get to control our government. Okay, but only when the outcome helps Democrats. That is literally the position of the Democratic Party. And I'm just saying that's totally indefensible on logical grounds. Not that logic matters in 2018, but I just want you to acknowledge that I'm right.
No, because federal law prohibits non-citizens from voting in a federal election. You can't vote for president or a congressperson or a senator if you're not a citizen.
So would you be cool with Russians hacking the school board? Would you be cool with Russians voting in a school board election?
If they are here and they have children enrolled in that school district, yes, of course.
That's not a requirement.
Parents to be involved.
That's not a requirement for the election, as you know. Yeah.
But we know the data, again, show that kids have a much better outcome in educational settings when the parents are involved, and if we can get better parent involvement in local
American
schools,
citizens,
the kids do better.
Okay.
Well, whether you end up rounding them up and shipping them back from where they came from, we want them to have better outcomes.
And that is the goal. Ethan Behrman, great to see you.
Thanks, Tucker.
Well, one college professor wants America to shut down colleges. He says our universities are not worth saving because they are that corrupt. He joins us next to explain what he's learned over decades working there. Jason Hill is a professor of philosophy at DePaul University, but if we follow his advice, he could soon be unemployed. He just published a remarkable piece in the Hill newspaper saying that universities, and he's worked in them for a long time, have become so overwhelmed by identity politics, socialism, anti-Americanism, and dumbness that essentially they're beyond saving. He suggests that taxpayers and private donors pull funding and let the whole system collapse for the betterment of the country. Professor Hill is also the author of the book We Have Overcome, which I have not read but plan to because his piece is literally that good and you should read it. He joins us now. Professor, thank you for coming on tonight. So did I misread what you wrote? You basically seem to have concluded, after years of working right in the middle of it, that the system is beyond saving.
I think so. I think these Bolshevik-loving welfare scholars have basically hijacked the system and are indoctrinating our students with not just anti-American invectives, but against the very core values that form our republic: capitalism, free speech, the morality of wealth creation. And I think that we're seeing a correlation also between the anti-free speech movements that have been accelerating across campuses and the ideologies that are taking root in the classrooms, the cultural relativism, the revolt against the Western canon, the cultivation of different perspectives. I think that we're not beyond repair. I think there's a solution. In my book, We Have Overcome, I go into some more details about how we can address this dilemma in the academy.
Well, within the confines of a cable news segment, sum it up for us. What do you think the solution is?
I think the solution basically is for the federal government to stop funding universities that are spewing anti-American invectives, indoctrinating our students who exist in these curated silos, and who are not used to other perspectives outside of their own, and who are supposed to be getting a critical education. I think it's also time for alumni donors to start withdrawing their funds, or if they're funding universities, to start affixing conditions to their funding. You'd be surprised at the extent to which alumni donors just give millions and millions of dollars with no strings attached, no conditions attached. Start saying, if I'm donating $10 million or $100,000, I need pro-American values taught. I need conservative values taught. I need values advocating not cultural Marxism and values that are inimical to Americanism, but we need values and scholarship, proper scholarship, that are rejoinders to the nonsense that's being taught on campuses today.
Professor, thank you for that. And again, I would encourage our viewers tonight to look you up, to look at what you've written and your book, because I thought it was remarkable and brave. So Godspeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the age of baby boys and baby girls appears to have come to a close. The most avant-garde parents are now raising babies. They don't have a gender. How does that work? Liberal Sherpa Kathy Aru, of course, knows the answer. She joins us next. Having a baby used to be a straightforward proposition. You could have a boy or you could have a girl. But now there's a third option. It's called steep civilizational decline. A handful of parents across America are deliberately keeping their children's sex hidden and instead raising so-called babies. The idea is that only the children themselves should be able to decide whether they are boys or girls, without any of that pesky biological reality getting in the way. It's all very confusing, like a lot of 2018 is. So, of course, we called in our interpreter of all things progressive, our liberal Sherpa, Kathy Aru, founding publisher of Catalina Magazine. She joins us tonight. So, Kathy, goes without saying you're for this, of course.
Yep.
But doesn't this mean if you're going to raise a baby, how would you be able to change your child's diaper? Because the second you change the diaper, of course, you'd no longer be able to pretend that there was a question about whether this was a boy or girl. You would know.
Well, it's not about pretending. The parent definitely knows the gender. It's about not necessarily labeling the baby. It's about allowing the baby to decide what gender that baby wants to be when that baby can decide, which is around 4 years old. So from 0 to 4, the baby will not be labeled. The labeling theory will not apply from 0 to 4 years old. The baby will be a they-be, neither a boy nor a girl, whatever gender that baby chooses to be. What other profound life decisions do we think people ought to be making at the age of 4? Are there any others?
Well, whether to get a tattoo, whether to get married, enlisting in the military, voting, drinking vodka, smoking Marlboro Reds. Is there anything else that we think 4-year-olds are ready to decide?
This isn't actually a profound life decision. I mean, biologically, there's nothing really going on from 0 to 4 in that area that affects a person's life. Biologically, the experts say that boys and girls, all genders are alike. The boy's brain, the male brain, might be a little larger. The female's language might be a little bit more advanced.
Okay. No sexism on my show. Hold on. Whoa, slow down. No, here you're out there like boys' brains are larger. And I just want to say that kind of toxic masculinity has no place in this program. Thank you very much.
But that's all they can think of.
The bottom line is, all they could think of, like difference in brain size, difference in genitalia, difference in bone structure, just minor things like just minor things like that. Not perhaps, like factually. So those are not minor things; those are definitive things.
Minor.
So, like, why would you not tell your kids about that? You know, at some point they're going to drop trow and look down and say, "Wait, we look different." And you're going to be like, "No, you don't. You're exactly the same."
And
that's lying, isn't it?
That's when the child, they say, is around 4 years old. So around 0 to 4, we're not going to say to a little female, a girl, that you're a little princess, or boy, you're such a tiger. The labels are gone. You're not going to put that outside influence on a child. You're just going to be neutral. Everything's going to be neutral.
The outside influence of biological reality. So would you do this with anything else? Would you? But could we decide that we're not going to acknowledge temperature or weather or traffic? And you could just say, you know what, I don't think it's raining outside. Or you can decide whether it's raining outside. I mean, the weatherman says it is, that there's snow on the ground. Or the weather, you know what I mean? The weatherman says that it's 15 degrees out. But I'm going to, you know what I mean? Just kind of make up my own reality.
The parents who are really leading this movement.
We acknowledge biology and nature as real, right?
But the biology, the parents who came out with this, who came out in the New York Times and started this baby awareness, this gender-neutral awareness for babies, basically said, why should people be so obsessed if your baby is going to be a boy or a girl? Who cares about that area? It's actually a little human. We are bringing a little human into the world. Who cares about the genitalia? Who cares?
May I just suggest why? And this isn't just my opinion, but the opinion of every person who's ever lived going back, let's just say 10,000 years for the sake of neatness. Because men and women are completely different in key ways.
Babies?
Can we not say that anymore?
Babies are different. Babies aren't different. They're little human beings, and there's really not much of a difference between different genders. No. There is no difference. And men and women, we would say, are equal.
I'm trying to laugh so I don't cry. Kathy Aru, you can be equal but different, which they are. Great to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Turns out, and this is not as important, obviously, as Vladimir Putin, but UFOs are real, actually. The government believes they are. They're also far more common than we thought, and they may be a threat to commercial aviation. One of the world's great experts on the... Well, for decades, only crackpots and crazy people believed in UFOs. That's what I thought anyway. And then in recent years, it turns out that governments have been taking them seriously all along. Very seriously. Nick Pope is a journalist who has spent years researching UFOs for the British government. He says that UFOs aren't just real. They also frequently come close to crashing into commercial airliners, among other things. Nick Pope joins us tonight. Nick, thank you very much for coming on. So it's really not a question of, do governments believe UFOs are real? Yes, they do. The United States government does. The British government does. The question is, do they have any idea what they are, where they're from?
No, we don't. We keep an open mind on it. We don't rule anything off, take nothing off the table with this. Our point really is that whatever these things turn out to be, there is a serious defense, national security, and air safety issue here.
Yes. Well, so that's kind of the nub of it, and that's where my interest comes from. So why aren't governments encouraging the population to, as they say about terrorism, if you see something, say something, report sightings to the government so we can make sense of this potential threat?
Well, they should be, and that's what we certainly did at the Ministry of Defense for many years. We took it very seriously. Our own pilots were seeing these things. We were having radar operators track them. And we knew, again, through intelligence and through open source material, we knew that the Russians and the Chinese and others were working on this too. The problem was that just the pop culture baggage from the term UFO, flying saucer, little green men, people don't take it seriously. But they should.
So we've ruled out, I think, that these are aircraft, experimental aircraft, or technically advanced aircraft from other countries. Is that true?
Well, no, we keep an open mind, as I say, and some of these things probably are Russian or Chinese, whoever it is, but that's the point. We must find out if there's something in our airspace we need to know. For years, governments said they didn't do this. They did. I did it for the British government. I can only talk about this now because my old employers are gradually declassifying and releasing information about my old job. We now know, of course, the Pentagon had a program too. I think it will take congressional hearings to get to the bottom of all this, not just in the United States, but all around the world. And I'd like to see those congressional hearings.